It's sweatshirt wearing season again. As you can see, I've got my sweatshirt on. It's not that cold here in the shop yet, though. It's 11 degrees Celsius. I'm sure that people that are living down south would see that as very cold. But here in Canada, that's shorts weather, man. Anyway, I'm cleaning out my drawer here. That was in my, what is that, drill bit cabinet, to talk about structure. And I need it kind of as a prop to illustrate what I'm talking about here. Because you need these things when you're trying to get a point across. And the reason why I'm making this point is because it comes up fairly often. You get people talking about or making comments about the way things are put together and how strong they are. And they don't seem to understand or have a good understanding of exactly how strong things need to be and how strong things actually are. All right, so this drawer, I'm using a drawer for an example. Before I talk about the drawer, I want to get something out of the way though. I am not a structural engineer, okay? But I have a good understanding of the way things should go together. And in particular, I have a good understanding of how to put things together so you get maximum strength or very close to maximum strength from the materials that you're using and the method you are using to join them together. That's the important stuff. See, because, okay, there are structural engineers today, but long before they came on the scene, there were intelligent builders, I guess you could say, that understood these things. And it wasn't something that was written down in a book. It was passed on through the trades, basically. You would learn from a master who learned from someone before him, and all this was passed down. And all of this was based on experience from doing things and building things. You know, all of these buildings, these older buildings that existed before real engineers came along, they still standing today because a lot of the stuff that was built before them fell down, and the people that built them learned from that experience. You learn from your failures as much as, or even more than, from your successes. So I want to talk about drawers. Now, what I have here for this drawer is what you could call the traditional type of construction. That's the way that people basically had to build drawers before there were strong adhesives and strong fasteners in particular, and also dimensionally stable products like plywood. See, in the old days, I guess you could say, you had no choice about what you were going to work with. If you're a woodworker or a carpenter, you had to work with wood, and it would be solid wood, basically. You would have to know what the wood was going to do in order to join it together, and it would stay together. So the drawer, the traditional drawer construction, is actually very cleverly designed to account for a lot of the problems you would run into with solid wood. For example, the front that goes across here is joined typically to the sides like this in a U-shaped type arrangement. And the joint construction at the corner here, I have box joints in this one, but traditionally you would have like dovetails or something like that. And it would have to be very strong because you're pulling on the drawer from the handle out front here. All of the load is pulling forward on that. It's pulling the entirety of the drawer forwards. So the joints that you have on these corners right here would have to be very strong because that's the connection. That's the only connection between the front and the rest of the drawer. And the front is what's carrying all the load, of course, when you pull it out or push it in. That's because the bottom of the traditional drawer construction, very much like I have here, would be solid wood as well. And that couldn't be, generally speaking, couldn't be connected to the front because it has to be allowed to expand and contract with seasonal changes in moisture. And you can see the way I got this one oriented here. The grain is actually going across the drawer. This is absolutely the correct way to do it. What's happening here is the panel is expanding this way, back and forth this way, towards the front and towards the back, and it's not expanding and contracting very much along the grain. That's the way wood works, by the way. It doesn't expand and contract very much. It's actually a negligible amount. It's something that you don't have to make allowances for, actually. So it's not moving this way, it's moving this way. And what I've done here is I fastened it with a single screw at the back here to this back rail. And it's also, I think I glued it, I might have. I don't know, I could have. You can glue it solidly to this back rail here. Likewise, you can glue it solidly to the front rail, but the problem comes with how do you keep the drawer from, bottom from bending down then. So what I chose to do was fasten it solidly to the back rail here. That holds the drawer bottom up in place, tight to the back of the drawer here. And the rest of it is dadoed into the sides. You can see that right here. And it's also dadoed into the front. And the front of the panel that's dadoed into the front is free to move in and out because there's space there. I allowed, I think, something like 1/8 of an inch for expansion and contraction there. But even when it's fully contracted, I guess you could say, in the middle of the winter, it still won't come out of that groove in the front. And when it's fully expanded in the summer, it still won't completely fill that groove that's in the front either. So you can probably see what I mean when I say that these corners that join the front of the drawer to the side of the drawer have to be very strong. They are the backbone of the structure for this drawer. They are the most important joints in this type of construction for a drawer. They have to be very strong because they have to resist all that pulling and pushing forces. They've also got to resist, to a certain degree, racking forces. That's where the drawer can twist and get caught inside the opening. So this is the old method, and as demonstrated here, it's still used today because you really don't have any other good choices when you're using just solid wood. Now, these days, though, you have strong adhesives and you have strong fasteners like screws. Screws are very strong. They're also very fast. And you have something that's known as plywood that a lot of people look down on. But plywood is so beneficial for, especially for stuff that has to be, put together and it can't move type thing. Now the thing about a drawer is, okay, this one I oriented the grain of the wood across like this so that when it expands and contracts, it's front to back here. And I've got that contained within this part right here. Whereas if you orient it the other way and it expands this way across, then it may swell out enough to put pressure on the side of the drawer and the drawer will get stuck inside the opening type thing. So you have to pay attention to that. But that doesn't happen to plywood. Now I've got another drawer here and the bottom in this one is actually 1/2 inch plywood. And what I've done is I have made the sides from 1/4 inch material. And yes, I did use box joints to join the front to the side, but that was basically just for show. It really didn't have to be box joints. It could have been just a butt joint pretty much, and that might have been strong enough. I probably would have reinforced it with a spline or something like that as well. But the major structure here is based on that plywood panel in the bottom, where it's glued solidly along the front here. It's also glued solidly to the sides and to the back as well. And you can do that with plywood because it doesn't expand and contract like solid wood does. It will a certain amount, but like the long grain expansion and contraction of solid wood, it's negligible. You don't have to allow for it. So what you wind up with is, say you take the front of the drawer, which is this right here. When you're pulling on this, not all of the stress is going on these corners here. Actually, very little is going on the corners. It's going on this joint that goes across here that's solidly glued to that plywood panel. And that's the biggest benefit with making a drawer this way. And that brings up the final point that I want to talk about here. When you look at something, the way something's built, the structure of it, the way it's put together, the way the joinery is, and the tendency, of course, when you're inexperienced especially, is to zoom in on particular joints and say, well, that looks weak or that looks too strong or whatever. Usually it's the too weak part. People typically, inexperienced people, typically underestimate the strength of the material and the joinery used or grossly overestimate it. I've seen it go both ways, actually, where something was put together with like duct tape, basically, and it's bound to fail. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have something that's put together with like 1,000 screws when you really only need maybe a dozen. So the point is to look at the bigger picture instead and look at the other factors involved with putting something together. Take this drawer again, for example. If you focus on the corners here and how strong the joint is there, and you don't look at the other things involved, like how strong the connection is to the plywood bottom panel right here, then you'll tend to make this construction here overly strong and put too much emphasis on doing that. Got to go back to the traditional drawer design again briefly to talk about this, and this is how I often get comments from people saying that you're not supposed to glue in the bottom panel in the drawer. And that is absolutely the case for this type of drawer, the traditional drawer assembly. You do not glue in a solid panel fully into the drawer frame, because what you're doing then is you're restricting the movement of the panel, and it will cause either the panel to crack or break some other part of the drawer. So you don't glue that in. However, since you don't have to deal with that type of problem with this type of construction, because this panel doesn't expand and contract, you can glue this in fully and you will not have a problem. In fact, as I already pointed out, it will actually add tremendously to the overall strength of the drawer.
I saw you at another mall.
Well, I'm very happy for you.
You're not really Santa. If you were Santa, you could do magic.
You want to see some magic? Here, let's watch you disappear.